Welcome to another edition of the Pedalshift Project. The Pedalshift Project is a series of conversations, thoughts, and experiments around the bike touring lifestyle. From tips and tricks to ideas on how to ride your ride. Let's shrink the world by bike. Show notes and more are available at pedalshift.net/092. You can email the show, pedalshift@pedalshift.net, or call the voicemail hotline at 202-930-1109. And check Pedalshift out on all the socials as well. Happy 92 to everyone out there. This is Tim Mooney, your humble host, back again for another edition of the Pedalshift Project. Very excited to be here. I've got some news. I've got some more news. I've got even more news on top of that. It's a very newsworthy episode, so we'll talk a little bit about that. I've got a fine adult beverage here. It happens to be my first whiskey of the season. It's a little chillier outside as we're kind of getting some fall-like weather here in the DC area, and I hope where you're at is good weather. I know those of you listeners in Houston, listeners in South Florida, you've had some weather. You're getting some weather as I record this here on the 5th of September 2017. Thoughts are out with all of you. Hopefully that's all going to be going all right. I will say no more about that. Let me talk about some big changes. Number one big change is, so you've all met Kimberly, my wonderful girlfriend. You met her, I think, in the episode 73, about bicycle touring and yoga. Kimberly owned, there, I see I just blew the lead, right? Kimberly just sold her yoga studios. Now, I've been working with her for the last decade, basically helping her run those yoga studios. And so that was sort of ostensibly my day job, was doing that. And so now the big news is that I no longer have said day job because said studios are now sold to a wonderful company that's going to be doing wonderful things with the yoga studios. What does that mean for me? What does that mean for Pedalshift? Well, first of all, I'm going to be fine. I mean, this was all by choice and design, so no worries here. I'm going to be doing basically a lot of the same kind of stuff that I've done for Kimberly, which is I was her lawyer and I was her tech guy and I was all of these other things, did marketing. I did all those types of things. Now I'm going to be doing that as kind of a consultant for anybody that's interested in that. So if you run a nonprofit or a business and you're interested in having a new website designed for you or any of those types of things, I'm now in the market for such things. So that will be the one ad that I will do for my services here on this show. But what I think that's really exciting about Pedalshift and bicycle touring in general for me going forward is I am now that much more location independent with what I do. So I think that ultimately, although in some ways my time is going to be pulled more towards other projects and other clients and things like that, I'll also have more freedom, which means that I can work anywhere. And if you've been listening to this show for any period of time, you know that one of the things that I've been experimenting with most in the realm of bicycle touring is the whole pedalpreneur concept. Man, that's going way back to like early episodes. I don't think I've even mentioned that word once in about 50 episodes. But that was the idea that you can kind of work any place and have a job that follows you around, essentially. And that's sort of what I'm hoping to be able to pull off on a full-time basis now. So the idea will be that I'll be designing websites or I'll have client calls that maybe I'll take from the side of the road. I've done this before. I've done this throughout the years that I've been doing bicycle touring. So it's kind of exciting in that sense. It's also terrifying that there is no paycheck coming anymore. So it's me just basically finding the work and doing it. Here's the good news. I already have clients, so that's great. But I'm always looking for more. So if you have any ideas, go right ahead. You can shoot me an email, or of course you can go to tim-mooney.com, and that's my sort of businessy website, and that is where all of that will live. Here on the Pedalshift side of things, I will talk exclusively about bike touring and all of that other good stuff. If you would like to hear a little bit more about the story behind the sale of the yoga studios and sort of what this big life change means, I decided not to do that on this show because I want to keep this more about bicycle touring. Even though, obviously I have a component to my life that is an element of this show, but go over to my lovely girlfriend Kimberly's podcast, Tranquility Du Jour, and episode 404, we talk all about this, all about the elements of it, all about the decision making and all things like that. So if you're really truly interested in learning more about all of that, please feel free to go check that out. And I've got a link in the show notes at pedalshift.net/092 to that pod, so you can check that all out. I'm kind of excited. I think that it means big things for Pedalshift and for the show. So stay tuned. I think there's going to be some really cool stuff going on. Immediately, one of the things you may have noticed is this year, I wasn't exactly touring as much as I probably have in years past. Usually by now, I've done 2 big ones and I'm ready to do my third. So far this year, I've only really done 1 tour of note. And that, of course, was the Western Penn ride. Of course, if you want to listen to that, we've got the podcast in the past of that. And of course, Pedalshift Tour Journals Volume 8, which is really kind of fun. And it was, I think, my favorite of all the tour journals. So go check that out at Pedalshift Plus. But I'm going to be finally able to do a tour, and more importantly, it's going to be a longer tour. This is going to be the longest tour that I've done in a couple of years, at least. I'm actually going to be able to be on the road for a couple of full weeks, and I've done nothing longer than a week for a while. And that's one of the things that's really exciting about the new paradigm here, is that I think I'll be able to do more tours and longer tours as a result of it. So I mentioned this a couple of pods ago, or maybe even just the last one. I'm doing the Pacific Coast again, Newport, Oregon to San Francisco. It's going to be starting in the beginning of October. Stay tuned. I'm going to be talking about this trip in the next episode and the episode after that. And of course, I'll be doing some summaries as well. Mention it in the October newsletter that'll be coming. I mentioned it already in the September newsletter. By the way, if you haven't signed up for the newsletter, totally break news there. I broke this news that I just dropped right now. Did that in the newsletter the other day. Go sign up for it. It's free and you get cool stuff. Anyways, the October newsletter will have more previews about this ride as well. I have not decided what I'm going to be doing in terms of a tour journal for this ride, whether there's going to be the quasi live components or whether I'm going to do some video. I'm curious what you all would be interested in. There are definitely pockets of zero cell coverage on this ride, but there's plenty of internet opportunities, so I can get stuff up. So for those of you who enjoy the sort of reports as they go along, audio or perhaps even video, let me know. Just shoot an email, pedalshift@pedalshift.net. I'd be very curious. What would you like out of this tour? Because I'm kind of an open book on this, for this one. It's a ride that I know. It's a ride I've done before. I've done a tour journal in part on it, before. The very first one, in fact, it included big swaths of this. I'm starting in Newport because last year, as you may recall, I did Portland to Newport. So now I'm just sort of doing the continuation all the way to San Francisco. So I'm doing a little fast forward after I do a quick visit in Portland, to get down to Newport. So anyways, I'm really excited about this ride. I can't even tell you. It's been all summer long. I've been sort of stuck doing due diligence around this sale. So now I get to finally get on a bike and do some cool stuff. So I'm excited about that. Excited to share with you all as well. One more piece of news, again, a repeat, but the march to episode 100 of the Pedalshift Project begins or continues. I guess it continues here in episode 92. We got friends of the show, Brock and Aaron. There'll be special guests. We'll do all the usual nonsense. There will be a live meetup. It is very likely going to be on that first Friday in December in Portland, Oregon. If it's not the Friday, it's going to be the Saturday. I just wanted to mention it now. This is kind of a soft launch just so that everybody knows about it. If you live in Portland and you can come to something such as this, great. If you live near enough or you're going to be in Portland around that time, would love to have you. Don't know how big this is going to be, but at least getting a few people together to talk up Pedalshift and Sprocket Podcast, I think that would be a lot of fun. We're kind of angling this to be some kind of a holiday party, for lack of a better way of putting it. So that's the general idea. And perhaps, yes, Shifty the Elf will make an appearance. We'll see. But the March to 100 continues anew, first weekend in December in Portland, Oregon. Details to come, and hoping for additional cool things that will be elements of this as well. I don't know if we're going to be able to do the show live. If we can, that would be awesome. But that's a hope. We'll see what we can do. Worst case scenario, it's a meetup at a cool place in Portland. That's not so bad. On this episode of the Pedalshift Project, after 10 minutes solid, or at least 9 or so, of news or newsy things, it's a topic show. And this is one of the shows that I've been intending to do for a really, really long time. And that is my morning checklist every morning on tour. Now, I've modified it here. It's a quick hat tip to, to REI. You may have heard of them. Small company out of Seattle, Washington. They sell camping gear and stuff. Yeah. They put out a really very good 12-point list that I've actually upgraded my own personal checklist. And it was very close to the same, but I've got a link in the show notes to theirs. And I'm going to largely ape from the order that they do. Mine's sort of in no particular order, but theirs is an actual order with actual notes and stuff like that. So I thought this would be a little more helpful. Every morning, you should check your bike before you get out on the road. And why is that? Well, safety first. I mean, obviously, but also, if you haven't been doing a lot of long distance riding, maybe you're new to bicycle touring, maybe you're new to just riding in general. Over time, stuff loosens up. Stuff starts to, I'll say, fail on bicycles over the course of long distance touring. So what this allows you to do is to, in a very regimented way, make sure that everything is in tip-top condition before you start rolling. Many of us are going to be riding 40, 50, 60, sometimes a lot more miles every day. And it's important that the bike performs right because it makes a big difference. If your chain's clattering, if your brakes are loose, or if your brakes aren't working, if you've got squeals, if you've got anything else like that, it takes away from your ride. And it also could be a potential safety hazard. So it's really important to do a good overview every morning. Now, before I get into all of this, one thing that I would say, just as a starting point, is if your bike was performing poorly the night before or at the end of the prior day, make sure that's where you start. So if you were finding that the brakes weren't working as well as you could, or that there was some play in your headset or anything along those lines, your gearing was a little bit off and you need to do some barrel adjustments, things like that. That's where you would really want to start. Stuff that's low-hanging fruit that you know is happening. But other than that, these are things that I think you should do every morning. Your mileage may vary. You may disagree with some of these things. Open to comments on this, but this is what I do as modified by REI, which I think was a great list. So that was a lot of lead up. Number 1, test quick releases for proper closure. Hey, a lot of us have the quick release versions of tires. That's really helpful if you get a flat, or as you all say in the UK, a puncture. I like that. A puncture. I wish I should use that more often. Puncture. I like that word. Quick releases are great. Quick releases are very, very handy. Quick releases are kind of dangerous if you are not paying attention to what's going on. If you don't have that lever really ratcheted down, or it's really loose and has some play, you could have some really serious instances of wheels falling off on you while you ride. I have never had this before. However, what I have had is I've had a quick release undo itself while I was riding, not realize it, but feel a lot of play in the overall balance and steering of my bike while I was going along. And I went quite a long ways not realizing this was the case until I stopped, until I got off. It was just enough play for me to be like, it's no big deal. I'll check it in camp. Well, then when I saw that my quick release was wide freaking open, I realized how lucky I was. Many of you have done the same thing as me, that you're barreling down a hill and maybe you're on the shoulder of a highway. I'm thinking of Highway 101 and Highway 1, roads that I will be on in a few weeks now. You end up hitting a bit of a bump at the bottom of the hill. Well, if I had hit something like that, I could have gone a little airborne, lost the wheel, and really, really put myself in some bad place. So number 1 on the checklist is test your quick releases for proper closure. Make sure that you've got tension. REI says at halfway closed, you should feel tension on the lever enough so that you've got to kind of force it closed. And they say it leaves a mark in your hand. Well, I mean, I'm not so sure about that, but make sure that that really holds tight, because I'm here to tell you it can release on you if you don't have it properly tensioned. And of course, what that means is you just want to give it maybe another quarter twist or maybe even a half twist to make sure that that properly closes. So test your quick releases, number 1. Number 2, check that your wheels are seated correctly. This goes hand in hand with a quick release. It's sort of all part of the same thing. I've had situations where my wheel seemed to be out of true. And I don't know if any of you have had this issue as well, but all of a sudden I'm sitting going, is there something wrong with my spokes? Do I need to get out my spoke tensioner? Things like that. Well, frankly, if I very rarely have to tighten my spokes. My wheel does not go out of true very often, and that's partially because I invested in decent wheels as part of a good bike. However, when that wheel seems out of true, you know what the first thing you want to check? Make sure that that wheel is seated correctly. Ditto if you're having weird braking issues where you can't quite figure out why the brakes aren't hitting, if you've got rim brakes, of course, they're not quite hitting that quite as well. Check to make sure that wheel is seated correctly, because frankly, that happens to me more frequently than the quick release being out of whack. It's particularly true after I have a puncture. Hi, UK, I'm thinking about you. And I reseat the wheel, maybe not quite so right. So every morning, make sure those wheels are seated correctly and everything is aligned properly. Number 3, test your stem tightness. So what you want to do, get in front of your bike, straddle your front wheel, right? And squeeze that front wheel with your legs, right? Then try to twist the handlebars. If your handlebars move, if you can move them at all, your stem tightness is shot, and you should probably get to a bike shop as quickly as you can. If it takes a lot of effort to move it, well, you've got some time. If it takes very little effort, you really need to try to do what you can. Some people bring the tools with them that would allow them to tighten up that stem. It's not just necessarily tightening up that hex bolt, or excuse me, not hex bolt, but the Allen wrench screw at the top there. So get to a bike shop as soon as you can. That is a pretty dangerous thing. Also, if you've got some play in your headset, I get that every once in a while on my Safari right now. I have a funny feeling that's something that I'm going to need to get adjusted. It's not enough play that I think it's an issue, but it's enough that I've just started noticing it recently. So I'm going to be getting that into a shop soon. This, of course, is not the bike that I'll be riding in a couple of weeks, but the bike I kind of ride around town on the C&O and whatnot. So hopefully I'll get that handled very quickly before it gets any worse, because stem tightness is important. It's important for steering. It's important for balance, the whole 9 yards. That's number 3. Check your stem tightness. Number 4, check tire pressure. So, yeah, if you've got a pump with a tire pressure gauge, that's something I kind of recommend. They're not always really great. I just listened to a story recently. It might have been on Sprocket, where somebody was talking. I think it was a guy who was riding across country, and he found that the first time he used a tire gauge, he actually blew out his tube because he was doing it by feel so much. You know what I'm talking about when you just kind of squeeze the side of the tires. I think that's fine. What I have found for me personally is that when I go with the squeeze test, I'm almost always underinflating my tires. Can usually go a little bit more pressure than that. If you inflate your tires up more, it's more likely that you'll have a better, more efficient ride. This is not always true. We've talked about tire inflation before in a prior version of the Pedalshift Project. I tend to ride mine actually a little on the lighter side because I got those nice, gnarly, big, wide tires, and it helps with a little bit of shock absorption. Problem is if you're a little too light with the inflation, you could get into issues with pinch flats and all sorts of other things. Make sure that your tires are inflated to the degree and to the amount that you like and you prefer when you ride. We all ride our own rides. We all have our own preferences, but check that tire pressure and make sure that it is what you want it to be. Number 5, tighten loose grips. They can send you over the handlebars. I just quoted that directly from REI. I mean, that's file under duh, right? So make sure that everything on your handlebar where you're putting your hands is nice and tight. I would add in there, if you've got to retape things, retape them. Bring along a little bit of electrical tape. I find that's always really helpful on a tour, especially a longer one. Number 6, test the brakes. REI says, standing over the bike, pull your brake levers hard while pushing the bike forward to ensure brakes are engaging. Okay, yeah, that's a good way to do it. One thing that you may want to think about in terms of where your brakes are set, if you have them set really tightly, your braking power is actually less than if they're a little bit loose. So make sure that they're set the way that you want. If you feel like you've got a lot of downhills coming in, or you otherwise want a lot of stopping power, ease off on them a little bit in terms of your adjustments. If you prefer them really tight, that's a matter of preference. I like a little bit of play in them myself, just because it does give you a little bit more braking power. It's physics, that's science. That's just how it is. So test your brakes, make sure that they are where you want them to be. That's number 6. Number 7, make sure your seat is tight. I think that's true in all phases of life, really. Make sure your seat is tight. But in the bicycle touring context, make sure your saddle is actually in a fixed and locked position. If you grab onto your saddle and it wobbles or turns or twists or ratchets or whatever, I never say you're doing it wrong, because there's lots of ways to bike tour, but in this instance, I will say you're doing it wrong. Make sure that that thing is locked down. Make sure it's at the right height. Make sure it's in the position that you want it to. I've talked about this before. Saddle height in particular can be the difference between having knee pain and not. So just make sure that the saddle's in the position you want it to be and is locked down. Don't forget to mark it with a marker if you've got that. Hopefully you've been following that. I have still not done that in recent days since I have last marked it, and it is all worn off. I am the worst podcast host ever. Number 8, inspect your chain. Again, things you should do in life, always inspect your chain. Make sure that your chain is properly lubricated. Make sure that it is, when you move it around, that it's not clicking or clackering on your derailleurs. Make sure everything is fine. If you are finding that there is an issue at all with your chain, get to a shop as soon as you can. They're not super expensive to replace. They stretch over time. If you've been riding with your chain for a while, you may want to consider replacing it. If you are looking to replace any part of your drivetrain at all, it's time to change your chain as well. But just keep an eye on the chain, and make sure everything is looking okay. Sometimes it's easier said than done, but give it a good cleaning if it needs it. Give it some lubing if you need it. Make sure that the links are all looking good. Every once in a while, you may find a link that's looking bad, in which case, there are options. Of course, you can replace chain links as necessary if you've got the tools with you. But definitely take a look at it, because that's the difference between you moving and not moving. And frankly, we like you moving. Number 9, lube your chain. Oh, wait, I jumped the gun. So forget what I said about lubing your chain in number 8. And number 9, lube your chain. My favorite thing in the RAI thing is it says, do not use WD-40. I don't know if they have WD-40 in places other than the US and Canada. That is basically a degreaser, not a lubricant. But for whatever reason, throughout my entire childhood, everyone used WD-40 on our bike chains. How we didn't end up with broken stuff and broken chains and broken bikes, I do not know, but it seemed like a great idea at the time, because it seems like it's a lubricant at first, but the reality is it's actually displacing water, and is it evaporates and it's no longer a lubricant. It's a very bad idea. If you're finding that you're getting some surface rust on your chain, to the extent that if you brought a wire brush, hey, awesome. Take care of it then. Most of us don't. Make sure that it gets lubed up really good. Wipe the excess lube off. Make sure that things are going well. One thing that I notice on long tours, especially if I don't lube my chain, I'll notice really quickly after I lube it that the ride feels noticeably better. There's less noise. There's less friction. Things just work better. The chain is the thing that gets the most action on a bike, perhaps other than the tires. So make sure it's all lubed up. If it's gooey, clean it off. A lot of people don't pay a lot of attention to their chains while on tour. I just think you should take a look at it. Some people lube their chains every single blessed day, and for you, I say you get a medal. I'm not that guy. But that's fine. You should do that if that is what you like to do. Some people really love the feeling of a good clean chain and a good lube chain. And if that's what you do, that's awesome. For me, I just make sure that it's working. So that's me. Number 10, inspect your tires. Hey, remember, in the Pennsylvania ride, I told you about this, that the guy at the bike shop found a little nick in the sidewall of one of my tires, and he just got out a Sharpie and circled it right away. And he was a little concerned about it, so much so that he convinced me, and I think for good reason, to get a folding tire to replace it. I didn't replace it. I didn't have to. The tire held up, Schwalbe's for the win. but there is a little nick in it. So make sure you pay attention to that. Sidewalls for some tires, especially those Marathon Supremes that I ride, they're particularly vulnerable to sidewall cuts and nicks. So just keep an eye on it. If you see things like the casing thread showing or anything like that, you need to start thinking about finding a place to get a new tire as soon as you can. Just keep an eye on everything. Just make sure that there's no bubbling out or anything like that. Inspect those tires. Number 11, check yourself for loose clothing. First of all, check yourself. That's always good advice. Check yourself for loose clothing or hanging straps that could get caught in a wheel. Yeah, this is kind of important. Now, if you rock the jersey and the kit and everything like that, you're probably not worrying about this so much. If you're like me and you wear clothing that is a little more, I guess sometimes we'll call it regular clothes. Every once in a while, I'll wear a hoodie or I'll have something where there'll be a thing coming off of it. Make sure that nothing is hanging down and is going to catch yourself in spokes or anything like that. The one thing that where I'll find that happens a lot, I shouldn't say a lot, happens enough that I've noticed, is if I've got a set of wired headphones and I'm using those while I ride, sometimes those can fall and get into spokes. You want to be careful of stuff like that. So just be mindful of stuff you're wearing, stuff you're using. Don't let it get caught in a wheel. Last but not least, number 12, check your helmet for visible damage. I am hoping that you did not actually fall in a way where your helmet would have visible damage. This was the one that I've never really did. But I think it's worth noting. This was the REI inclusion. Yeah, look, if you're rolling with a helmet, which I encourage, especially if you're going to be on roads, I do think that you want to make sure that the helmet is actually going to be protective. And of course, if helmets have any kind of nicks or any kind of damage on them, they tend to be less protective, especially the lighter weight ones, the ones that are really foam based. So I would say if your helmet is somehow compromised in any way, shape, or form, time to get a new helmet. That's basically the bottom line. I'm not sure if that's an every morning kind of a thing, unless for some reason your helmet somehow got dislodged from you, or you took a fall and anything along those lines. But if your helmet ended up getting damaged because you had a fall, I think you've got larger things to worry about than this number 12 thing the next morning. But that being said, check your helmet for visible damage. I think that's all good. Again, link in the show notes to REI's blog about the bike inspection, what to check before every ride. This was true for not just touring, but for all sorts of different things. I thought it was really helpful and gave a little bit of structure to all of this for you all every morning before you go off on your bike tours as well. Hey, quick programming note before we close out the show. Next week is going to be an off week. Remember how I said that there were going to be a few sprinkled in off weeks here and there because of the whole timing to get to 100? Well, that's one reason. Also, it's my birthday on Friday. I'm not a big birthday guy, but we're going away. We're going to go to Montreal. I'm going to go see musical genius Jason Kent, who happens to do the theme song to this fine show. You've heard his music. It is ahead of his band Sunfield's latest release, Mono Mono. I hope you all get a chance to go check that out. I may actually try to convince Jason to come on the show real briefly for next episode so he can talk a little bit about Mono Mono. It's really good. You should check it out. So we'll see you in 2 weeks with an interview, not just maybe of Jason Kent, as fine of a musician as he is, but I've got a great interview in the hopper next week. Brock Dittus of the Sprocket Podcast talking about a really cool mini bike tour that he did going off to the mountains. And he overlooked wildfires and all sorts of craziness and using some fast forwards in there. He's got some really good stuff to share. So we're going to be talking to him next week. That will be on the following week's pod, episode 93. Looking forward to sharing that all with you. And as always, we'd like to close out the show with a big thank you to all of the supporters of the show through the Pedalshift Society. If you like what you hear, you can help maintain Pedalshift as an independent, listener-supported voice while expanding the offerings. We're talking $5, $2, even $1 a month helps with the cost of hosting the podcast and the website. You can do it for a bit. You can cancel anytime. I've got one-shot support, and that's welcome if you're not into the whole small monthly thing. Check it out and join at pedalshift.net/society. On to the society. Ethan Georgie, Kimberly Wilson, Caleb Jenkinson, Cameron Lane, Andrew McGregor, Michael Hart, Josiah Matthews, Keith Nagel, Brock Dittus, Thomas Skadow, Seth Krieger, Marco Lowe, Terrence Manson, Noah Schroer, Harry Telgadas, John Sikorsky, Richard Killian, Chris Barron, Scott Taylor, Brian Wren, Mark Van Ram, Brad Hipwell, Paul Mulvey, Stuart Buchan, Todd Stutz, Mr. T, Roxy Arning, Nathan Poulton, Harry Hugel, Ferguson Meek, Stephen Dickerson, Vince LaGreco, Ruth Divorcey, Michelle Miller, Matthew Lewis, Michael Baker, Billy Crafton, Paul Culbertson, Scott Culbertson, Matt Perry, Danielle Jepson, Cody Florchinger, and new for this episode, Tom Beninati. And thank you also to all past and anonymous contributors for making the show happen. Thank you for joining. You can find Pedalshift at pedalshift.net for more great bicycle touring content. You can hear the Pedalshift Project through Apple Podcasts or your favorite podcast app. Opening music courtesy of Jason Kent off his self-titled album. The track is called America. Check out his band Sunfield's latest release, Mono Mono, wherever cool music is available.